The first tank rolled down Main Street at exactly 6:47 a.m., its steel treads grinding against asphalt, still wet with morning dew. Sarah Martinez pressed her face against her apartment window, watching in disbelief as armored vehicles positioned themselves at every major intersection. The sirens had been wailing for 20 minutes straight, their piercing cry cutting through the dawn like a blade through silence. "This is not a drill." The emergency broadcast crackled from every radio, television, and smartphone in the city. All residents must remain indoors. Martial law is now in effect. Any violation will result in immediate detention. 2 blocks away, Mayor David Thompson stood in his kitchen, coffee mug frozen halfway to his lips, staring at the television screen with growing horror. Just 12 hours ago, he had been delivering what he thought was his finest speech yet, outlining his ambitious affordable housing initiative to a packed auditorium. The crowd had erupted in applause when he announced the groundbreaking ceremony for 3 new community developments. Now, according to the news ticker scrolling across the bottom of the screen, he was allegedly harboring a nuclear weapon somewhere beneath City Hall. David, what the hell is happening? His wife Monica burst through the kitchen door, her silk robe trailing behind her. Phone pressed against her ear. "Channel 7 is saying you're some kind of terrorist. They're showing footage of bomb squads surrounding our building." Thompson set down his mug with trembling hands. The ceramic clinked against the granite countertop with an oddly musical sound that seemed absurd given the circumstances. "I don't know. I honest to God don't know." His voice came out as barely more than a whisper. The phone rang, then rang again. Within minutes, the landline, his cell phone, and Monica's phone were all buzzing incessantly. Reporters, city council members, federal agents, and terrified constituents all demanding answers he didn't have. It had started with a single 911 call at 6:23 a.m. Karen Whitmore, campaign manager for Thompson's political rival, had dialed emergency services with a voice shaking with apparent terror. "Please, you have to listen to me. Mayor Thompson has a nuclear device. It's hidden under City Hall. He's planning to detonate it during the school board meeting tonight. Hundreds of people will die." The dispatcher, trained to take every threat seriously, had immediately escalated the call. Within minutes, the entire federal response apparatus was mobilizing. The nuclear emergency support team was airborne from 3 different locations. The National Guard received deployment orders. The city's emergency operations center transformed from a quiet morning shift into a war room buzzing with activity. Karen Whitmore sat in her downtown office, watching the chaos unfold from her 20th floor window with satisfaction gleaming in her pale blue eyes. She had orchestrated this moment for months, waiting for the perfect opportunity to destroy Thompson's political career and clear the path for her candidate, Richard Blackstone, to claim the mayor's office. Her phone buzzed with a text from Blackstone. "Are you insane? This wasn't the plan." Karen smiled as she typed back, "Trust me. By tomorrow, Thompson will be finished forever." She had been meticulous in her preparation. For weeks, her team had been conducting surveillance on City Hall, mapping out every entrance, every basement level, every forgotten storage room. They had studied the building's architectural plans dating back to 1892, identifying the perfect location to plant evidence that would support her claims. But the evidence wasn't what federal investigators would expect to find. Downtown, Colonel Marcus Webb of the Nuclear Emergency Support Team was coordinating the largest domestic terrorism response in the city's history. His teams had cordoned off a 6-block radius around City Hall, evacuating businesses and residences with military precision. The morning sun cast long shadows between the buildings as bomb disposal robots rolled down empty streets. "Sir, we've completed the initial sweep of the main floors," reported Sergeant Kim Foster through her radio. "No radiological signatures detected. Moving to sub-basement levels." Webb frowned, adjusting his earpiece. Something felt wrong about this entire operation. In his 20 years of federal service, he had never encountered a nuclear threat called in by a political operative. Usually, such calls came from disgruntled employees, mentally unstable individuals, or credible intelligence sources. Karen Whitmore didn't fit any of those profiles. Still, protocol was protocol. They couldn't afford to ignore even the most unlikely threat. Thompson had been escorted from his home by federal agents at 7:15 a.m. Not under arrest, but certainly not free to leave. They had installed him in a secure conference room at the FBI field office, where he now sat across from Agent Patricia Chen, answering the same questions for the third time. "Mayor Thompson, I need you to think carefully. Has anyone had unusual access to City Hall in recent weeks? Any contractors, maintenance workers, or visitors who seemed out of place?" Thompson rubbed his temples, feeling the onset of a massive headache. "I've told you everything I can think of. We've had the usual maintenance crews, some renovation work on the old archive rooms in the basement, city council meetings twice a week. Nothing unusual." "Tell me about the renovation work." "Standard stuff. Some water damage from last spring's flooding, new lighting installation, updating the filing systems. The construction crew finished up about 2 weeks ago." Thompson paused, a memory surfacing. "Actually, Karen Whitmore stopped by during the work. Said she was researching historical documents for some project." Agent Chen's pen stopped moving. Karen Whitmore was in the basement archives. Yes, she had proper authorization from the city clerk's office. Spent several hours down there over the course of a few days. Said she was looking into old zoning records. Thompson looked up sharply. "Wait, Karen's the one who made the call, isn't she?" Chen neither confirmed nor denied, but Thompson could see the answer in her expression. Meanwhile, in the sub-basement of City Hall, Sergeant Foster was making a discovery that would change everything. Her Geiger counter was clicking rapidly as she approached a section of newly installed shelving in the archives. But instead of finding nuclear material, she found something far more interesting. "Colonel Webb, you need to get down here immediately," she radioed. "We've got radiation signatures, but no nuclear device. What we do have is about 50 boxes of city records that someone has been very carefully contaminating with radioactive tags." Webb descended into the basement within minutes, his boots echoing in the narrow corridors. Foster led him to the discovery, shining her flashlight on small, metallic tags that had been affixed to dozens of file boxes and archive containers. Each tag was emitting low-level radiation, enough to trigger detection equipment, but nowhere near dangerous levels. "These are commercial isotope markers," Webb observed, kneeling to examine one closely. "The kind used for industrial testing. Someone wanted us to find radiation down here." Foster nodded grimly. "Sir, I think we're looking at a false flag operation. Someone set this up to create the appearance of nuclear material without actually possessing any." Webb's radio crackled with urgent communication from his command center. "Colonel, we've just intercepted communications between Karen Whitmore and an unknown party. You're going to want to hear this." The intercepted phone call played through Webb's earpiece with crystal clarity. Karen's voice, recorded just 30 minutes earlier. "Phase 1 is complete. The radiation tags were placed exactly as planned. Once they find them, Thompson's credibility will be destroyed. Even if they prove there's no real bomb, the association with nuclear material will end his career." An unidentified male voice responded, And Phase 2. Blackstone calls for Thompson's immediate resignation, positions himself as the candidate who can restore trust and safety. We leak details about the radiation find to every major news outlet. By the time the truth comes out, if it ever does, Thompson will be yesterday's news. Webb's jaw tightened as he listened to the recording. He had seen political dirty tricks before, but never anything approaching this level of sophistication and recklessness. Whoever Karen Whitmore was working with had been willing to terrorize an entire city, waste millions in federal resources, and potentially cause panic-induced casualties, all for political gain. "Get me Agent Chen," he commanded, "and get me a warrant for Karen Whitmore's arrest. This isn't terrorism in the traditional sense, but it's domestic terrorism nonetheless." Back at the FBI field office, Thompson was being briefed on the developments when his phone began buzzing with calls from city council members, citizens, and reporters. The martial law declaration had paralyzed the entire city. Schools were closed, businesses shuttered, public transportation suspended. Emergency rooms were dealing with panic attacks and stress-related medical issues. The economic impact was mounting by the hour. "Mr. Mayor," Agent Chen said, ending a phone conversation with Colonel Webb, "we believe you've been the target of an elaborate political conspiracy. We're going to need your help to set the record straight." Thompson felt a mixture of relief and rage washing over him. How do we fix this? How do we undo the damage that's already been done? "We start by arresting the people responsible," Chen replied. "And then we tell the truth." Karen Whitmore was at her desk, monitoring news coverage and social media responses. When federal agents appeared at her office door, she had been expecting this moment, had even prepared for it, but seeing the badge and handcuffs still sent a chill through her body. "Karen Whitmore, you're under arrest for making false statements to federal law enforcement, conspiracy to commit domestic terrorism, and inciting public panic," Agent Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying the weight of federal authority. Karen stood slowly, her mind racing through potential legal defenses. "I was acting on information I believed to be credible. If I was wrong, it was an honest mistake." "Ma'am, we have recordings of your conversations detailing the placement of radioactive materials as evidence to frame Mayor Thompson. We have documentation of your team's surveillance of City Hall. This was not a mistake." As the handcuffs clicked into place, Karen's carefully constructed world began to crumble. Her phone was buzzing incessantly with calls from Blackstone, who had undoubtedly realized that his political aspirations were about to become collateral damage in her scheme. The arrest made local news within an hour, but the full scope of the conspiracy wouldn't become public until later that afternoon. Federal investigators had spent the morning unraveling a complex web of communications, financial transactions, and logistical coordination that revealed the true depth of the plot. Karen hadn't been working alone. A forensic analysis of her communications revealed coordination with at least 6 other individuals, including campaign staff, a private security contractor who had provided surveillance equipment, and a laboratory technician who had supplied the radioactive isotope tags. The conspiracy had cost nearly $40,000 to execute and had been funded through a series of shell companies connected to Blackstone's campaign. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. At 3:47 p.m., while federal agents were processing evidence from Karen's office, they discovered a safe hidden behind a false wall panel. Inside that safe were documents that revealed the true motive behind the elaborate scheme. Karen hadn't just been trying to destroy Thompson's political career. She had been trying to prevent him from discovering her own criminal activities. For the past 18 months, Karen had been systematically embezzling money from Blackstone's campaign accounts. Using a sophisticated network of fake vendors and inflated invoices, she had stolen nearly $200,000, money that was supposed to fund legitimate campaign activities, but had instead been diverted to offshore accounts under her control. Thompson's affordable housing initiative hadn't just been a political threat. It had been a direct danger to Karen's criminal enterprise. The mayor's new transparency requirements for all city contractors would have triggered audits that inevitably would have uncovered her embezzlement scheme. By destroying Thompson's credibility and installing Blackstone as mayor, Karen had hoped to ensure that those audits would never happen. When Agent Chen called Thompson with this final revelation, the mayor fell silent for a long moment. So she was willing to terrorize an entire city to cover up theft. That appears to be the case, sir. The financial crimes alone carry substantial federal prison sentences. Combined with the terrorism-related charges, we're looking at potentially decades of incarceration. Thompson looked out the window of the FBI field office, where he could see military vehicles still patrolling the streets. When can we lift the martial law order? People need to get back to their lives. Colonel Webb is coordinating with federal authorities now. We should be able to make the all-clear announcement within the hour. But Thompson knew that lifting martial law wouldn't be enough. The city needed to hear the truth directly from him, needed to understand not just what had happened, but why it had happened. He needed to address the fear, the anger, and the confusion that Karen's scheme had created. I want to call a press conference, he told Agent Chen. Tonight, at City Hall. The people deserve to hear what happened from me, not from news reports or government statements. By 6:00 p.m., the martial law order had been officially lifted, and the streets of the city slowly began to return to life. But the real drama was just beginning. Thompson's press conference was scheduled for 8:00 p.m., and by 7:30, the area around City Hall was packed with reporters, citizens, and federal agents. The building itself had been cleared of all radioactive materials and declared completely safe. But the psychological impact of the day's events lingered in the faces of everyone present. Karen Whitmore was being held in federal custody, but her arrest had already become a major news story. Richard Blackstone, facing the collapse of his political career and potential criminal charges related to campaign finance violations, had attempted to distance himself from his former campaign manager, claiming ignorance of her activities. But the evidence was mounting against him as well. Financial records seized from Karen's office showed that Blackstone had approved several of the suspicious payments that had funded the conspiracy. At best, he had been criminally negligent in overseeing his campaign finances. At worst, he had been a knowing participant in both the embezzlement and the false flag operation. As Thompson approached the podium outside City Hall, the crowd fell silent. Camera crews from every major news outlet focused their lenses on his face, which showed the strain of the longest day of his political life. "My fellow citizens," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the evening air. "Today our city was terrorized not by foreign enemies or radical extremists, but by the corruption of our own political system." He paused, letting the weight of that statement settle over the crowd. Karen Whitmore, working in coordination with my political opponent's campaign, fabricated a nuclear threat against our city. She planted radioactive materials in City Hall to make her false claims seem credible. She was willing to traumatize every man, woman, and child in this community to advance her own criminal agenda. The crowd's reaction was immediate and visceral. Shouts of anger rippled through the assembly, but Thompson raised his hand for quiet. But that's not the whole story. Federal investigators have discovered that Ms. Whitmore was also embezzling money from campaign accounts, stealing funds that should have gone to legitimate political activities. She targeted me, not just as a political opponent, but because my administration's transparency initiatives threatened to expose her crimes. A reporter called out from the crowd, "Mr. Mayor, what's the status of Richard Blackstone's involvement?" Thompson's expression hardened. "Mr. Blackstone is currently under federal investigation. I cannot comment on the specifics of that investigation, but I can tell you that the evidence suggests this conspiracy involved multiple individuals and substantial financial resources." Another voice from the crowd, "How do we know this won't happen again?" "That's exactly the right question to ask," Thompson replied. "Starting tomorrow, my administration will be proposing the most comprehensive political transparency legislation this city has ever seen. Every campaign dollar, every political communication, every interaction between candidates and city officials will be subject to public scrutiny." He looked out over the crowd, seeing faces that reflected anger, relief, and determination. What happened today was an attack on our democracy itself. It was an attempt to use fear and deception to subvert the will of the people. We will not let it succeed. The applause began slowly, with just a few individuals, but it quickly spread through the entire crowd until it became thunderous. People were applauding not just Thompson's words, but their own resilience, their community's ability to survive and recover from an unprecedented attack on their civic life. As the press conference concluded, federal agents were making additional arrests. The laboratory technician who had provided the radioactive materials was taken into custody at his home. 2 campaign staff members who had assisted with surveillance activities were arrested at the airport, apparently attempting to flee the state. The private security contractor was apprehended during a traffic stop while driving toward the Mexican border. By 10:00 p.m., the conspiracy had been almost completely dismantled, and the legal system was beginning the process of holding the perpetrators accountable. Karen Whitmore spent her first night in federal custody in a holding cell, facing charges that could result in a life sentence. Her scheme to destroy Thompson had instead destroyed her own life and the lives of everyone who had helped her. The embezzled money was frozen in offshore accounts, and federal prosecutors were confident they could recover most of it. Richard Blackstone's political career was over, even if he avoided criminal prosecution, which seemed unlikely given the mounting evidence. His reputation was so thoroughly tainted that he would never again be a viable candidate for public office. The campaign organization he had built over years of political activism dissolved within days, as staff members and volunteers fled the scandal. But the real victory wasn't the destruction of Thompson's enemies. It was what happened in the weeks and months that followed. The transparency legislation Thompson had promised moved through the city council with unprecedented speed and unanimous support. Campaign finance reporting requirements were strengthened to prevent future embezzlement. New protocols were established for verifying threats against public officials and public facilities. The city's emergency response procedures were reviewed and improved based on lessons learned from the crisis. More importantly, the community had been galvanized by the shared experience of surviving a coordinated attack on their democratic institutions. Civic engagement increased dramatically. Voter registration reached record levels. Attendance at city council meetings tripled, as residents took a more active interest in local government. 3 months later, when Karen Whitmore was sentenced to 23 years in federal prison for domestic terrorism, embezzlement, and conspiracy charges, Thompson was present in the courtroom. He watched as the woman who had tried to destroy his life and terrorize his city was led away in shackles, knowing that justice had been served but taking no pleasure in her downfall. Outside the courthouse, Reporters asked him for his reaction to the sentencing. "Today is not about revenge," Thompson said simply. "Today is about accountability. Ms. Whitmore's actions could have resulted in injuries or deaths. She weaponized fear for personal gain, and she has paid the appropriate price." He looked directly into the camera. "But more importantly, today is about moving forward. Our city is stronger now than it was before this crisis. We've proven that we won't be divided by fear, that we won't let corruption poison our democratic processes, and that we stand together when our community is threatened." The final chapter of the story came 6 months later, during Thompson's re-election campaign. Running unopposed for the first time in his political career, he won with the largest margin of victory in the city's history. His affordable housing initiative, which had been temporarily delayed by the crisis, resumed construction with strong community support and additional federal funding. The first families moved into the new developments exactly 1 year after Karen Whitmore's 911 call had plunged the city into chaos. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Thompson spoke about the journey the community had traveled together, from terror and confusion to unity and renewal. "A year ago, someone tried to use fear to tear our community apart," he said, scissors poised over the ceremonial ribbon. "Today, we celebrate not just these new homes, but our determination to build a better future together." As the ribbon fell and families walked into their new homes for the first time, the city's resilience was complete. Karen Whitmore's attempt to destroy their community had instead made it stronger. Her corruption had led to unprecedented transparency. Her deception had inspired greater civic engagement. Her crimes had resulted in justice for all. The tanks were gone from the streets. The sirens had been silent for months. The emergency broadcasts had been replaced by regular programming and the normal sounds of a thriving city. But the memory of that terrifying morning when fear had ruled the streets remained as a reminder of democracy's fragility and the eternal price of vigilance. In her federal prison cell, Karen Whitmore watched the news coverage of the housing development opening. She had 22 years left on her sentence, with no possibility of parole. The offshore accounts she had hoped would fund her comfortable retirement had been seized and returned to the campaign finance system. Her political career, her freedom, and her future had all been sacrificed for a scheme that had accomplished the exact opposite of what she had intended. Thompson had not only survived her attack, he had emerged stronger and more popular than ever. The transparency measures her crimes had inspired would prevent future corruption for generations. The community solidarity her divisive tactics had generated would endure long after her own name was forgotten. As the sun set over the city that evening, casting long shadows across the new housing development where children were already playing in previously empty yards, the lesson of Karen Whitmore's failed conspiracy was clear to all who cared to see it. Democracy is not fragile because it can be attacked, but because it requires constant vigilance to defend. Truth is not weak because it can be temporarily obscured, but because it demands courage to speak and wisdom to recognize. And sometimes, in the hands of those who would corrupt it for personal gain, fear becomes the very tool that reveals the strength and unity of those who refuse to be afraid. The city had learned that lesson the hard way, but it had learned it completely, and it would not soon forget.